Hello, welcome back to the channel Industry Explorers. My name is Siobhan Colleen, and we are going to talk more about the automotive industry today, specifically about how to become an engineering leader. Now, I have with me Stephanie Thompson, who is an incredible woman. She has been twice voted Canada's top 100 most powerful women and has led engineering teams for over 20 years. That's amazing. How do you get recognized first of all?
Sorry, say that again?
How do you get recognized for that?
Oh, yeah, pure recognition. That was how it started off. Somebody nominated me. And from there, it really just, there's an application, you put your kind of portfolio together. And not only do I do a lot of work, during my day job, but I do a lot of volunteering in the community. And, I really feel kind of, I've had a great opportunity in my life, and I like to make sure that that connection can happen for others, especially young women who are coming up through engineering fields.
You're definitely breaking the bias with everything that you do, and I'm absolutely loving it and here for that. So if you guys like what you see, make sure to go to patreon.com/industry explorers for bonus content. You just pay a once a month fee of $5. I'm going to get rid of my membership tiers because really, the best thing about being on Patreon is the bonus content. So if you want to hear the more in-depth questions that follow this interview, head over there. Now, without much further ado, what is your role as an engineering leader? And what are the responsibilities of an automotive engineering leader?
Sure. The role is really to lead engineers, and that's kind of the simplest form of it. But I was an engineer for many years, about 10 years before I got the promotion to leader. And some of the differences really are about, kind of being the person who executes and does the work, making problems go away, finding solutions, coming up with creativity, to leading a bigger team. There might be 5 or 6 people on my team at any given moment on a project, and making sure that I'm getting the best out of them. As a leader, I'm not the expert in everything that goes on, but it's really about working with experts, being able to support their needs and what they need to accomplish, tapping into their talents, helping them be as strong as they can be in the areas that they want. And for me, it's about making roadblocks go away, right? So that they can kind of optimally put the solutions in place. So for team building, working with others, that's another piece that I really enjoy. I like to say I like to problem solve the people side of problems, and really it's about working with the people that are putting the solutions in place to support them to make sure that we can function together.
Fabulous. And how does that fit into the big picture of the automotive industry? Because I'm thinking that there are different kinds of engineers to design or test a car. So, what area do you specifically work in?
Yeah, well, I've had my 20 years in manufacturing engineering. So lots of different areas in that we make the parts that go into cars. But specifically, the area that I work in is building engines and transmissions. And so that's the power that goes behind your vehicles. Very technical industry, lots of real historical knowledge. The industry's been around about 100 years, right? And so there's a lot of legacy in how you make something. But it's
Mhm.
really rewarding in that as you're manufacturing, you've got something that you're producing. But of course, it's really important to focus on things like, how can people make these safely, but as well as how does the customer end up in a safety factor? We want to make sure everybody, goes home and has, a great life after they're using, the vehicles and cars that we produce. So from a big picture, it's really about being the people that work on buying the machines. I work with a lot of people who are doing the building themselves, how they integrate to the equipment, trying to make that seamless. And for many of the years that exist, that used to be an industry where you had to kind of have a certain type of physique. You had to be a certain type of person to be able
Mm.
to lift and move very heavy components. And what the really exciting opportunity is that so much technology has come down the pipes in the last few years that allow that place to be equalized. No longer are we, doing a lot of repetitive motion that we're hurting and kind of breaking our bodies. We're doing a lot of really interesting work, especially with things like lifting, moving parts to the people so that they're not bending over, causing back problems. We're using lifts and automation to lift heavy parts that take off that pressure so that you don't have to be physically strong to do that. And what's exciting about that is it opens up the world of building, cars, vehicles, engines, transmissions to everyone. There's not a person that can't come in and do that job anymore. And that really is a great equalizer. It really is, an inclusive business where traditionally you wouldn't have thought that to be the case.
Well, and that's a win for everybody because that promotes an elongation of quality of life because hopefully the trends that you are seeing in your industry are that there's less lower back pain because more people are utilizing the mechanical advantage and the ergonomic practices and the technology that has come with this industry. You mentioned that you specifically work with transmissions. So, and you also mentioned that you do seamless integration with all the other departments. What are some of the other, if someone wanted to be an automotive engineer and they're thinking, but what do I want to work on? Transmission is an option. What are some of the other options?
Well, within manufacturing, you really can make a whole bunch of products. So anything that you see in your car, in your driveway, you open the hood, you open the doors, every component there is probably made by another company, right? And they come into
Mm.
one big manufacturing place and they assemble all the bits together. So from my perspective, what we see is manufacturing from we cut metal, we work with controls and programming and logistics. We definitely work with lots and lots of people to allow the people to work on machines. We have quality departments that ensure the quality of the incoming parts plus the quality of what's going on the door. So there's a focus in that aspect. There's people who supervise from an hourly perspective, working with our union partners. And really, there's what's nice is that there's no real limit to the engineering piece of it is about the problem solving and about supporting, but we're part of a bigger picture and a bigger team, right? So it's not like you're kind of working in an isolated area. So for some engineers who want to kind of maybe be in the design space or work independently, that's one. But for me, it's really about moving and helping teams grow to structure themselves in a way that allows, creative thinking and bigger pictures. It's really fun to work on a problem that maybe nobody else has solved. And when you get to this team that's struggling, you can help them lead through defining what problems are and working on identifying data sets that allows you to see the picture in a different way. And so working with that group, not only are you really doing the problem solving, but you're helping others strengthen theirs so that, the more that you can teach, the more problems can be solved. We always say you're not limited by the number of problems, right? Everything can be better, everything can be faster, everything can be cheaper, everything can be safer. You're really limited by kind of the energy and the enthusiasm of the team that's working with you. And so as a leader, if you can inspire others to have more enthusiasm, to have more kind of big picture thinking in the problems that they solve, it means that you can create a team that kind of works and functionally contributes together.
You mentioned working from data sets. So would you say that you work with data analysts as well as technicians to solve like one problem
Well, that's really what it comes down to, because sometimes you see something with your eyes. You're going to a manufacturing, so you're going out to a floor. There's people, there's a lot of opinions on what the problems are. And but really comes down to show me the data, right? Show me
Mhm.
how the problem either is consistent, maybe it's the opposite, it's not consistent.
Hmm.
And if the data doesn't exist, you have to kind of figure out how to create it, how to look at trends and charts. So there's people on my team that are definitely very good and excelling at that. But in some cases, it's about creating the data that you don't have, creating a study, creating and working with experts in the field. We don't work in isolation. We've got central engineers and we've got people who work in design spaces. And as a leader, it's really pulling all those people together. So even though your team might not have the answer today, how do you generate the information so that you can continue to solve it in the future? There's not a problem that can't be solved, but sometimes how long it takes to solve the problem is really as good as you bring your experts in and not being shy or afraid to ask for that help when you hit the roadblocks along the way.
My next question is a perfect segue into the lifestyle portion of the job. How do I want to ask this? So you talked about, being a design engineer and kind of working in isolation, but when I hear you describing the big picture, it sounds like a very, very, very collaborative process. So if if you if I were someone who wanted to be more independent or someone who wanted more collaboration, do both of those worlds exist in
In
automotive
manufacturing,
engineering?
100%. Yeah, they
And within your teams, do those very different worlds also exist?
For sure. We
Okay,
definitely have
cool.
people who are, we call them subject matter experts. They're
Yeah.
experts in their field. But I think you almost have to have a little bit of both, because the problem you're solving kind of sometimes necessitates the solution. So it's really about being kind of adaptable and kind of
Mm.
having all of those skill sets. There's sometimes when the problem is very kind of deep and complicated and you have to go really into the nuances. I have people on my team who have been in one particular smaller field for 30 years, and they are by far global experts in what they do. I'm more of a generalist, right? I'll know a little bit of a whole bunch of departments, but my job is to pull all those experts together. So experts can definitely work in a field where they don't have to interact as much. But in manufacturing, you're producing a product that other teams and other people are working with. And so there's definitely a connection between you and what we call our customer, which is the people who build and work on the lines every day, right? If they're
Mhm.
struggling with a machine, if something is bothering them, if they're hitting their shins every time they walk past something because the layout and the space isn't right, like these are small aggravators, but time after time, it really builds up into something that stresses them out and struggles. And as an individual, when you're stressed and struggling, right, you're not performing optimally. And that can cause, ramifications and defects or mistakes that can happen. And so it's really about taking away all of those challenges and working on implementing something. So while you can work in isolation to kind of come up with a solution, the best way is to bring it out to the field, test it out, work with people, get your feedback. It's not about being perfect the first time you try something. It's about trying it a couple of times or working with the teams. And really the people who are your end users are the ones that are going to tell you whether or not your solution's good or not. I can have all the fanciest of solutions and ideas, and we can have all of the kind of think tanking happening. But if the person who's using it doesn't think it's a great idea or doesn't like it, they're not going to adapt it. And so managing that idea, managing change, helping teams get through from point A to point B, facilitating conversation about how to make solutions optimal is part of my job as well. Kind of like a coach would be, or kind of like, leading people to a goal, right? It's a piece of, as inherent people, we don't always like change, even if it's the right thing. And so having those conversations, having open dialogue, allowing them to give their feedback, so important to the design process, because in essence, they're the ones that can decide whether something's going to be successful or not.
This is very insightful for people who want to get into any career at any capacity of any walk of life. I love how much you bring up having like a coaching mindset, and how I'm oversimplifying this, but your job is to see the extroverts and the introverts on your team and to pull from their strengths in a way that makes everything work beautifully when it's all put together. Um, Wow. Sorry, a bunch of ideas just popped into my head. You're very inspiring. Can you describe an example of one of your work projects?
Sure. I mean, I've got everything from really grandiose projects. One that I kind of worked through about 5 years ago was purchasing an assembly line. I mean, it sounds like an example, but
That's
it really
interesting. No,
was
that's very
just
interesting. You just
one brand new thing. Yeah.
is this an assembly line? Like, did they have components and you're like, okay, I need this section, this section, this section. This is going to work when it comes together? Or is that something that you like work with a company that manufactures workstations and you go, let's design this together. This is my space layout. Please
Yes,
walk
all
us
of
through
it.
that. That's a
Yeah,
very
yeah. When
interesting
you get into major capital
job.
projects, there's not one solution. So I was the project leader for my site, and there are multiple sites. So you're working at kind of a big high level. But it was really exciting. Like when I first got hired into my job, I was a player on a team that had an implementation. And it was really neat for me to see kind of 10 years later to take that leadership role over what I'd essentially been hired to. So I had some practical experience of being, a member on the team. And it was a neat kind of come full circle in my career to take the leadership. But yeah, it's a little bit of everything. If you work for a major corporation like I do, there are definitely design specifications, kind of rules that you try to follow so that you're not creating everything from scratch every single time, right? You have to kind of build and make your continuous improvements go. But at the same time, I used the 10 years of experience that I had. We looked at what was different. Technology changes all the time. And frankly, there's a lot of people that kind of can make these projects that don't have the experience. And so doing things like design reviews, looking at past practices, pulling in those experts, seeing how technology changed and learning that scope. If I have an electrician who, graduated 10 years ago, now I'm buying all the latest and greatest equipment. I have to kind of understand how that electricity and how the components, the computer systems and all that work to be able to help support the maintenance team in putting training plans in place. And so the diversity of what you start getting into is very vast. You're buying a system, it needs to produce and make a function happen. So you're testing that out. You're going through troubleshooting. You're working with a vendor, like you mentioned. You're buying equipment from somebody who is a builder of expertise of machines, but they don't know your business and they don't know your customers or your people. And so you really go through and research all of those elements. And over the space of probably, like a year and a half, 2 years, you take it from nothing, literally, the floor was empty, to building up to a point where you can mass produce, your product that you're making. And all along the way is a journey of bringing your team along. You start with a team of maybe small group of 5 people who are doing all the initial assessments, figuring out where in the plant it goes, laying out the equipment, understanding things like water, piping, electricity, all the supplies coming in. Working with the construction teams to do the implementation. So when you're just physically installing it and how things go about, to turning the machines on, to getting them power, to understanding what it's doing, what the fault messages are saying. Is the mechanics working the way you think or designed or thought they were supposed to? And if they don't, coming up with solutions to it. And so it's really an iterative process that you have a kind of a beginning and an end, but you can always kind of optimize as you go, and you're always continually learning. It never stops. There's always a better way of doing something. And so you take kind of that energy and that lesson, and then you bring a bigger team in. And then your job really is to teach them and work with them. And how do you make sure that they can do their job safely and on time and at cost, and all of those elements. And I really enjoy that piece, that breaking down of knowledge and technology for people to help support them so that they can do their job every day.
I love that. Is there any travel involved?
I mean, at various times for sure. The equipment we bought from came from a company in Japan, and so quite frequently at the beginning, it was traveling to Japan to work directly with them, to see the product, to see the results. As an automotive person, automotive, kind of headquarters of the world is in Michigan. And so a lot of stuff comes out of that organization. So traveling to Michigan, I remember, one March, it was like, 17 different hotel rooms. We were bouncing around all these different
Oh my
places.
gosh.
I remember checking out of a hotel room that wasn't actually that many floors, because I'd forgotten what room I was in, because it was the hotel from the night before, that kind of thing. And so there's definitely periods where it's great. You can see the world, you can travel, you can work to kind of pull all those pieces together to go see them before you get them to your site. And then there's usually a phase where you're really just kind of hardcore in the place that you live. You're working at getting all those details. So there's a cycle of kind of buying new, working on it, debugging it, and then if you're lucky enough to work on the next project that comes about. And for some people, there's no travel. They really are kind of homebodies. They really want to just focus on something that exists. And so they stay put. And so I love that there's that flexibility between, kind of seeing and bringing in new things, as well as if it doesn't fit your lifestyle or your family or your travel, maybe you've got young kids and you don't want to be on the road. There's definitely jobs for those people as well. And kind of a little bit of everybody in the middle.
Yeah, it's really good that within your team that this is an opportunity for many different kinds of people with different lifestyles. Whether you want to travel or not, the option is available within the automotive engineering industry. That's really good for young people to know as they're trying to decide, what do I want my lifestyle to be like, and what career do I want to pursue? How much time do you get to spend on yourself, and what do you enjoy doing?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I've been really good at figuring out that balance. I think it's about trying not to take work home, right? Having that opportunity to, disconnect. Some people have a hard time. And I think actually some of the best problem solvers are the ones that kind of muddle over it while they're sleeping at night. They seem to have these big visions the next day when they've come in, as their brain is saturated on the problem, and come up with a solution. But I also have an opportunity, and this is what I would recommend to anybody, is look for a kind of that corporate culture that is doing good things in the community. So for me, it's really about particularly helping women into non-traditional, so whether it's trades or engineering. And if you can find a company that kind of has that values and has that aspect of volunteering, you get to do the best. So I do support, young women who are coming in, they're engineers working for me, or volunteering for organizations that the company is sponsoring. And if they're doing activities or guest speaking, or, trying to work on a project that they're working on, I get afforded that time as well. And so you kind of get the best of both worlds. You feel good and rewarded because you're giving back to the community. You're helping your industry because you're supporting that pipeline of what's coming in. And you work for a company that you have the same or similar values and supporting that next generation. And so all of those things are really kind of key as you're researching to figure out what you're going to do when in the next phase of your life.
Yeah, I think you're the first person to mention corporate volunteering.
Mm.
A lot of people talk about travel, like some people that I've interviewed travel every single day, like throughout most of the year. Some people I've interviewed, are homebodies, and they work just 9 to 5, and when they're home, like no email. I think work-life balance, it's the definition is different for everybody. It just depends on what you're doing. It depends on how much you want to work. And I think really it depends on if you're like mentally and even spiritually fulfilled,
Yeah.
because if you're working a job that's just draining you and you work part time, that's different than working full time or overtime for a job that invigorates you, that excites you, and you have so much passion for what you do. Your job, it's an extension of yourself, I feel, Stephanie, if I'm kind of gathering that from you. And
Yeah.
even in your off time and in your volunteer time, the values that you have and that are aligned with the corporation you work for, it like extends out into the free time that you have. What
Yeah.
is your favorite what's your favorite organization that you volunteer for?
Well, I'll tell you one of the most critical ones, and this is like when I first graduated university, engineering, it's very academic, right? There's not as much practical hands-on. And then you get to the automotive world and you don't have as much as the experiences you really need. Truthfully, you don't understand how to break apart machines or take them apart, the maintenance side of it, really important, because how do you fix or maintain or make something better if you don't always understand the fundamentals? And I think experiential learning was very different. It was very much get good grades, go to university. And that is not quite how everything needs to work. You need to have a balance of both. So early in my career, the organization I got connected with was First Robotics. And I'll tell you, for somebody who is kind of passionate about the world, it's a great organization. It exists all over the world. So Canada, the United States, no matter what city you're in, you can probably find a team or a function. But as a young engineer, how do you develop more skills, particularly a young woman, particularly somebody in a very male dominated role? Where you don't necessarily have the confidence to fail or want to look like you don't know what you're doing. I think some people are very good at maybe being students, but for me, I was always very kind of embarrassed or shy that I didn't know how to do things. But how do you know how to do things unless you try or learn?
It's funny you mentioned that. I used to feel the same way earlier in my career, not
Ask
wanting people to know
questions.
that I'm green, but
Yeah.
people
It's
can
it's
tell.
cause and
They can
effect,
tell.
right? If you
It's
don't
better to
ask,
just
then you
ask the
see green.
question.
Yeah. But for me, and it was a way, so I volunteered for this organization. They go into high schools, they teach high school robotics kids.
What are they
And
called?
it's
What is it called again? Something robotics?
First Robotics.
First
Yeah.
robotics.
Yeah, and it's an organization that it's really high. I say high technical. You're going to build a robot that's like 6 foot, 120 pounds, right? So it's not like a little tabletop fun, which is great too for skills. But you also have to kind of bring in technical people. You have to bring in mentors. You have to bring in people who really understand design, because otherwise, that size stuff will start breaking and shearing. You have to meet electrical code. So there's a very high level of technology built into these robots, which is industry standards. So as you're reading specs and understanding how that works. Now, as a young person, I didn't necessarily know how to do that, but I was really good at leading and bringing people together, right? So it's
Yeah.
kind of an extension of my job. But I also could work with the teachers, work with the electricians, work with the mechanics and the tool trades who are helping the students. And I could learn alongside too, right? Like it was kind of self-serving because it was a fun opportunity to learn how to work strategically, how to see a goal and envision and move people in a way that was safe. I wasn't getting evaluated. There was no, report from my boss to tell me how I was doing. And so it was a way to kind of build technical skills of what I liked, what I didn't like,
Hmm.
and to do it in a way that was helping, young people in the community. And so I learned just as much as they did as they were going, because if you're a young person in high school, you're spending all your time, maybe you're going into be a trade. And so maybe you're taking those technical courses. I never took them. I mean, I'd never soldered until like actually a few weeks ago. I actually put a course on for myself and, ran it for a whole bunch of my friends and women around the area, because I've never seen or been able to learn how to solder. So how do you do that? And sometimes kids in high school have really practical technical skills. And so it's not so much about age in learning. It's about, opportunities. And if you've never had an opportunity, how do you find and seek those out? And I think that's really critical, especially as an engineer. you can't expect to know everything, but you can expect yourself to delve in and learn something new. And I think that's the critical piece of continuing learning and being a good problem solver.
Yeah, I can see why you were in a top 100 list, by the way. If you guys like what you're watching, head over to patreon.com/industry explorers. Become a Patreon, a patron, a patron, as I say on every episode, and check out the bonus content. We're going to get into some really good stuff. I can already tell. So, for right now, let's talk about the educational aspect of becoming an automotive engineering leader or someone just in that space. Is a college degree necessary? And
Yeah, absolutely. There definitely is kind of a fundamental
yeah,
technical. It's a way of kind of getting a baseline of where you're starting from. However, 4 years or the time of space, you can't teach you everything. And so when you get into industries, when you get into specifics, there's definitely a lot of continuing learning. I've learned and sought out more topics in the 20 years than you ever will be able to touch a fragment on in your four. But the four helps you. It helps you to see what you like, what you don't like. Perhaps there's a particular element. Maybe you want to be somebody that studies a very finite or narrow field and really become that expert, subject in globally. Or maybe you like something more general. But very much there's a focus really for sure on whether or not you're going to go very deep into a subject or very broad, and that baseline helps you figure it out. In engineering, it really helps you just decide if you like problem solving, right? If you like to go down that path. And so there are fields that need to have like licensing and certification. If you're going to be making bridges and building construction sites, you have to have kind of that structural background to be able to do that. And that's definitely kind of legitimate, stamping and going through and making sure you've got the right credentials for that. But if you go down the project management side, which I did, it's really about kind of learning that particular industry and the rules and requirements around that space.
if I were to go the engineering path, what what majors would you recommend if I specifically wanted to go into automotive?
The ones we hire the most are mechanical engineering and electrical engineering. They're what's kind of the interaction of robotics. And there's actually a few new ones that
I
are
was gonna
growing
ask
down.
that.
Mechatronics, right, is kind of the terminology, which is the intersection of mechanical and robotics.
Hmm.
And so how you kind of have to understand how sensors, how cameras, how part recognition software works, how things move. But you also have kind of the structural piece of it, which is repetitive movement within a machine. But we also hire what we call industrial engineers. If you're into the kind of the rigging piece of it, it's really about layouts and organizations and how people interact with the structures and the stability, how you do ergonomics, how you position materials to lay them out so that they are, in a sensible order. But that's definitely the three kind of big faculties that we use to do our job every day.
And I would assume maybe even computer scientists if you wanting to get into the automotive industry for an autonomous vehicle.
Yeah, oh, for sure. There's so much coming down the pipes. I mean, we talk about the industry because our CEO is Mary Barra, and I love the line that says the automotive industry is going to change more in the next 5 years than it has in the last 50, right? And
Mhm.
what's really exciting for young people coming up is that I had to kind of learn about all the history of what came before me. It was really important because you are kind of building on successes,
Mhm.
because the standards were created from mistakes of the past. So you have to kind of have that legacy and understanding of how things used to work to know what is going to work in the future. But with the change in getting into kind of the industry 4.0 and 5.0, where you're starting to introduce really, really good computer systems and heavy technology, plus adding machine learning so that you really have a kind of a self-learning mechanism. It's not about me teaching a point and moving a little joystick so that that little point is known. The machine can learn and adapt and go down those paths so that you're less necessity to have a person that can make human errors when the machine is learning. And all of that technology then builds into the autonomous vehicles that we're going to be seeing in very, very near future, right? They're already kind of on the roads. California's got companies that are doing, self-driving taxi services. So there's definitely, we're on that precipice of seeing, calling for a ride share, and the ride share shows up with no driver. And so that idea that we're moving into this next phase of technology for students, there's no barriers right now. That tech has just been invented. It's just being made. And it really becomes why it's not so much in automotive companies that you're working about, it's tech companies, right? So much software, so much, hardware in terms of interfacing, using your car like a hotspot so that you can communicate, where cars are going to start communicating with each other. And there's definitely a really interesting next step. So people coming up to technology, if you have autonomous cars, you don't need steering wheels, and perhaps you don't need brakes. And so the engineers of the past who would have designed those systems, all of a sudden there's an obsolescence involved, right? And so being able to transfer your skills into other areas and other departments will be really critical for at least the next 5 or 10 years. And that's really where I'm at. I'm in a position where, I make engines, which are, internal combustion and, run on gas and have, environmental and other aspects to them. But as we kind of transition, and what we're seeing through the last few years is a very early adopt for people to transition into, electric vehicles. And I think it's really exciting to see how that next legacy is going to move. The way people's lifestyles, with the effect that COVID had on an industry, which is very focused on transportation. And so really that adaptability, I talked about those skills where you need to kind of be able to respond and learn. It's not so much about those 4 years of university, it's how you can continually learn. And if you're not afraid of learning, then it doesn't really matter how the industry changes, because you're going to adapt and learn and grow along with it. And that's the longevity of your career, where it's going to come from.
That was amazing. Do you have any last thoughts that you want to share with listeners before we close this out?
I think for me, it's always about trying not to take yourself out of the game. So much of what we do, we think, I can't be that person. I'm not that smart and talented, whatever the noun is. And we let our self-doubts make sure we take ourselves out of the game. And I think that's really important to think about. My kind of motto growing up was always, and unless they take me out, unless I fail out, unless, whatever happens, I'm just going to keep going. And you got to figure out how to build up those confidences, how to make sure that, nobody can tell you that you can't do something. So for young people coming up, or even those who are changing industries and feel that, there's a particular area that's not for them because they don't look a certain way, talk a certain way, act a certain way. I really think it's about, we want to live in a world where the barriers are not there. And I think for me, engineering is one of those. There's so many different opportunities to create, to grow, to learn. And if you can be the person that can kind of keep going and inspire and break down those barriers, or in my case, trying to break it down for others so they don't feel that way, I think that's definitely a step in the right direction.
Very, very wonderful. And everybody, you can follow Stephanie Thompson on LinkedIn, and I'm sure you can all see, as well as myself, why she has been voted Canada's top 100 most powerful women twice.
Thank you.
That is like, I feel like that's like an Olympic medalist carrying 2 golds with them. Like, yes, I absolutely love it. And this has been very inspirational. I can think of people who would be very touched by your words and who absolutely should check out First Robotics. A lot of really good insights, Stephanie. Thank you so much for being on my show.
Thanks, Sean, for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody. If you like what you heard just now and in the past 38 minutes, then head over to patreon.com/industry explorers, become a patron of mine, and check out our bonus content. We're going to get into some deeper conversation about how to be an automotive engineering leader. My name is Siobhan Colleen, and I will see you guys on our next adventure. Take care.